Hello and welcome to the revision video for Religious Attitudes to Rich and Poor in British Society. This is for the Unit 3 exam paper for AQA Religious Studies B, which is the Religion and Morality paper. Just before we start, a couple of admin points. If you see the pen, then I'll be expecting you to take notes or to write something down. Whenever you see the pause button like this, it's to give you a little bit more time in order to write something down. If I want you to pause it, then I will tell you, but at any time during the video, obviously you can pause it yourself if you need a little bit more time to think or a little bit more time to write. And when we do exam questions, I'll tell you exactly how much time I want you to spend on it. Try to give yourself exactly that amount of time to give yourself the most realistic exam practice possible. Okay, so we'll start off with some keyword definitions. Obviously, it's really important that you know the keywords so that whenever they turn up in exam questions, you know exactly how to answer those exam questions in order to get the most marks possible. So, as we go through, just write down a number next to each one of these questions and write down the word that you think goes with the definition that I read out. Number 1, an amount of money or investments. Number 2, the condition of being without money, food, or other basics needed in life, being poor. Number 3, taking risks with money in the hope of gaining more money, for example, betting or playing the Lotto. Number 4, reliance on something or someone else, for example, drugs or alcohol, a possible cause of poverty. Number 5, a cycle of poverty that means if you are born poor, you are likely to have less opportunity to become wealthy than others. Number 6, when a person or organisation owes others more money than what it has. Number 7, wealth which a person has not earned but has been left to them by a family member or friend who has died. Number 8, when a person earns a large amount of money in salaries and bonuses, sometimes known as fat cat salaries. Number 9, used to describe a person who has no interest in doing anything. Number 10, raising money for a particular cause, normally a charitable organisation. Number 11, the lowest hourly rate an employer can legally pay their employees. This is currently £6.70 if you are over 21. Number 12, an organisation that does not work for profit and which usually works to help others, for example, children in need, shelter, or Islamic relief. Number 13, the money or investments that a person owns, money, property, cars, shares, for example. Number 14, regular gambling competition available to all over 16s and which offers a large prize but also gives money out to charity. Number 15, not having a place to live. Number 16, attempting to make money through selling a product or service at a profit. Okay, we'll just quickly go through the answers to those. Make sure that you've got a different coloured pen and that you're marking them to see whether you got them right or wrong. Obviously, those that you've got wrong, you need to make sure that you're concentrating your revision around those keywords so that if they come up in the exam, you're able to answer those questions. So the first one was an amount of money or investments. That is wealth. The condition of being without money, food, or other basics needed in life, being poor, is poverty. Taking risk with money in the hope of gaining more money, betting or playing the Lotto, is gambling. Reliance on something or someone else, for example drugs or alcohol, a possible cause of poverty, is dependency. A cycle of poverty that means that if you are born poor, you are likely to have less opportunity to become wealthy than others, is the poverty trap. When a person or organisation owes others more money than what it has, is debt. Wealth which a person has not earned but has been left to them by a family member or friend who has died is inheritance. When a person earns a large amount of money in salaries and bonuses, sometimes known as fat cat salaries, is excessive salary. used to describe a person who has no interest in doing anything. Apathy. Raising money for a particular cause, normally a charitable organisation. Fundraising. The lowest hourly rate an employer can legally pay their employees, this is currently £6.70 if you're over the age of 21, the minimum wage. An organisation which does not work for profit and which usually works to help others, for example children in need, shelter or Islamic relief, is a charity. The money or investments that a person owns, personal wealth. A regular gambling competition available to all over 16s and which offers large prizes but which also gives away money to charity, the National Lottery or the Lotto. Not having a place to live, homelessness. Attempting to make money through selling a product or service at a profit, business and enterprise. Throughout the topic we'll be looking at key rules that you can remember in order to make sure that you do as well as possible. Each one of these will be applicable not only to this topic but to other topics in your GCSE, and so they're really useful to remember if you want to do well in your exams. The first one for this topic is that Christians believe in love your neighbour. This means that Christians need to be kind and caring to other people at all times, and Jesus told Christians that they need to do this. I want you to pause the video and answer this question. How will this belief affect a Christian's attitude towards helping the poor? Start your answer with, this teaching will encourage Christians to... Pause the video now. First thing that we're going to look at within this topic then is how people make money and what religious views are on making money. I want you to pause the video and bullet point 5 ways on your piece of paper that religious people could make money. Remember, in your exam, if you're asked a question like this, then religious people are just the same as everybody else. So if you can think of 5 ways that anybody could make money, as long as they're not irreligious, then they're the correct answer. So write down 5 ways that religious people could make money now. We need to look at different reasons why people are rich. Now there are lots and lots of reasons why people might become rich or wealthy. Different people will have different opinions as to whether these are good ways or bad ways. Now, as we go through each one of these, I want you to just bullet point what each one means and whether you think it's a good way or a bad way to become wealthy. The first one is savings. This is when people save lots of money through being frugal or through not spending lots and lots of money on things that they don't really need. This can lead to people having quite high bank accounts, and it means that they become quite rich. The next one is gambling. Gambling is when you bet money on an event happening that may or may not happen. If the event happens, then you will win some money. If it doesn't, the people who you've placed the bet with will keep your money. This can lead to lots of people becoming quite wealthy. However, it's also a big cause of poverty. Bookmakers, who are the people who you bet with, often make huge amounts of money through people betting on the wrong thing. The next is business and enterprise. This is people starting up their own businesses and becoming wealthy through selling things or services at a profit. We can also look at illegal ways that people may become rich. For example, drug dealing is one way that some people become very wealthy indeed, but obviously if they're caught doing it, they'll be sent to prison. Some people become wealthy because they've inherited money from their parents or from other relations. Often, people who are wealthy via these means haven't had to do a huge amount in order to get their money. The final thing that we need to look at is earnings from a job. Now obviously some jobs are paid better than others, and some people get paid huge amounts of money for the work that they do. This can lead to many people becoming very wealthy indeed. I want you to think about the different ways that we've just looked at of how people become wealthy. Think about religious views that you already know about, and try to tell me which one of the ways above a religious person would not agree with. Explain your answer. Pause the video now and give yourself 2 minutes to do this. It's time for a keywords test. I want you to give me the definition of gambling. If you can give me an example, that would be worth 2 marks in your exam. Gambling is taking risks with money in the hope of gaining more money. An example could be betting or playing the lottery. Next, we need to look at how people see the rich and the poor. Now, there are lots of stereotypes surrounding the rich and the poor, based on many different things. We need to look at what these stereotypes might be in order to have a clear idea of what others' views are of rich and poor people. So we'll start off with the rich. We've got an example here of a rich person in the form of Alan Sugar. Now, he is often held up as an example of somebody who has gone from the bottom all the way to the top. He started off with very little money, selling things out of the back of a van, and now earns millions and millions of pounds and has a huge business. Rich people, we could often say, are able to afford a comfortable lifestyle. They may have fancy cars and nice holidays. They may be very hard working. They may have got lucky and inherited wealth, or be wealthy from winning the lottery or other competitions. Many rich people are generous with their wealth. Many are stingy with their wealth and look down on other people. Now on to poor people. At the top, we have a picture of somebody in abject poverty. Abject poverty is when you're unable to afford anything at all. So if we talk about homeless people, we could talk about them being in abject poverty. Some people are in relative poverty. This simply means that relative to other people, they are poor. So it may mean that they are able to afford to live in a house, but they're unable to afford things like a car or a holiday. Some people who are poor are homeless. Some people think that poverty is the fault of the person that is poor because they haven't worked hard enough. Others think that it's due to being unlucky in life and things not going their way. Of course, it could be down to either one of those things. Pause the video now and write down 4 bullet points to remember what different people think about the rich and the poor. It's time for another of our key rules. This is an Islamic key rule of the Ummah. This is the belief that all Muslims are part of one brotherhood or one community called the Ummah. This means that they need to look after one another. As you think about this, I want you to try and write down what Muslims can do to help the poor because of their belief in the Ummah. Start your sentence off by writing, Muslims may help the poor by. Pause the video now. In just the same way as we did for being rich, I want you to write down now 5 bullet points that you can think of for reasons why people are poor. Pause the video and write down 5 things. These are the reasons that the exam spec expects you to be able to talk about in terms of reasons why people are poor. For each one, write down the reason and make notes underneath explaining why it might mean that someone is poor. The first one is dependency. We mean by this being dependent on something. This could be drugs or alcohol. It could also be things like gambling. Dependency is a massive reason why many people are poor, because they prioritise that thing rather than looking after themselves or saving money. So they end up spending a lot of money on things that they don't really need. Apathy is the idea that people just don't want to do anything. This is often cited as a reason why people are poor when they don't want to work or when they're too lazy to go out and get a job. A lack of education could be a reason why people are poor. A lack of education leads to less opportunities in terms of being able to get jobs, and it could mean that you are unable to go further in your job because of the level of education that you have reached. Your family situation could be another reason why you're poor. Having lots of children that you can't really afford to pay for could be a reason why people are poor. Another reason in terms of family situation could be divorce or difficult family breakdowns which lead to people not having the money that they expect to have. Another reason for being poor could be illness. Sometimes when people are unable to work, the only money that they get is from disability allowance, and this means that they don't have as much money coming in as other people who are able to work. The final reason for being poor given is gambling. We gave gambling as a reason for being rich as well, but as I mentioned before, if you gamble on the wrong things, a lot of people lose an awful lot of money. Most people who gamble do not become rich from gambling. Many people become poor, especially if gambling becomes an addiction. It's time for another keywords test. Give me the definition for the poverty trap. The poverty trap is a cycle of poverty that means that if you are born poor, you are likely to have less opportunity to become wealthy than others. For example, those living in poverty are likely to have a less good education than those who are not, and so you won't get as good a job and therefore remain poor. The cycle of poverty that often leads to poor people remaining poor is known as the poverty trap. The cycle looks like this. Often, people are born into families which have a low income. This statistically leads to lower levels of education and lower levels of health. This means that people are less able to carry out jobs to a high standard. If they're ill or not as healthy as others, they won't be able to do their job to as high a level as others. And if their level of education is lower, then again, they won't be able to carry out their job to as high a standard as other people. This leads to a lower level of performance in work, and this, therefore, leads to a lower income. As you can see, this cycle perpetuates itself. It means that people who are born into low-income families are much more likely to stay poor, whereas people who are born into higher-income families are much more likely to stay wealthy. Many people see this as being completely unfair, because people obviously don't choose what family they're born into or what background their parents have. It doesn't seem fair that this is such a high deciding factor on what your income is likely to be for the rest of your life. I want you to pause the video now and try to think of ways that people can overcome this cycle of poverty. Try to write down 4 bullet points in order to explain what you think that people could do in order to overcome the poverty trap. Pause the video now. It's time for another key rule. This is a Christian key rule of, in the Bible it says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. This means that if you get too attached to wealth, you may start committing sins and lose your love and closeness to God. Use this teaching in order to explain a Christian's attitude towards being rich. Start off your explanation by saying Christians think that being rich is good or bad because. Pause the video now and give yourself a minute in order to do this. We've already looked at some of the reasons why people may be poor. Now we need to look at some of the ways that people might overcome poverty or be helped to overcome poverty. For each of these things, I want you to write down 3 bullet points on your piece of paper to explain what this is. The first way to overcome poverty that we're going to look at is counselling. This is when somebody will visit a counsellor and they may be able to talk about the problems that they are having and find solutions to them. It helps people to overcome poverty by talking about why they are poor and finding solutions to it. For example, if you're not confident enough to apply for university because no one in your family has ever gone, a school counsellor may be able to help you. They may be able to give you the confidence in order to apply for university and increase your job prospects. The next way to overcome poverty that we need to look at is charity work. There are charities set up to help those who are homeless and those who are poor. Shelter is an example of that. Shelter helps the poor by giving directly food and shelter to those who are homeless. The Salvation Army provides hostels, food and soup kitchens for those who are homeless. Time for another keyword test. Give the definition for business and enterprise. Can you give an example? Business and enterprise is attempting to make money through selling a product or service at a profit. An example could be setting up a business selling old mobile phones. Another way to overcome poverty could be government support. The government provides various types of benefit to help people who are in poverty. For example, unemployment benefit or job seekers allowances for people who are looking for work but do not have a job. People who are searching for work are given money every month rather than getting a salary. In order to achieve this, they must prove that they are actually actively looking for work. This could involve going to the job centre. Another form of government support is old age pension. This is given to all people who are over a particular age and have made sufficient national insurance contributions throughout their life. People make national insurance contributions automatically through their wages, and so if you have paid enough in national insurance, you qualify for an old age pension. This is a set amount for everybody across the country, but many people put into private pensions as well whilst they are working in order to ensure that they have got enough money in their old age. Many people who get to pension age without having put into a private pension as well find that they struggle in terms of money. Time for another key rule. This is a Christian key rule, and it is one that Jesus said. Jesus once said to a rich man, "Go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven." This means that you should help the poor as it pleases God. In return, God will reward you greatly in heaven. I want you to explain a Christian's attitude towards helping the poor, using this teaching. Start your sentence with Christians think that they should or should not help the poor because. Pause the video now and answer the question. Next we need to look at who is responsible for the poor. By responsible we mean who should be the ones to look after the poor or take care of them. Make at least 3 bullet points explaining who you think should be responsible for the poor and who other people may think should be responsible for the poor. Try to explain why each group should be responsible for looking after those who are poor. If you finish, then you can complete the trailblazer task. That is, why might somebody think that the poor should not be helped? If you can, use a religious teaching to support your view. Pause the video for 2 minutes now and try to record as much of that as possible. Here are some ideas for groups who could be responsible for the poor. The first is the government. Obviously, this is a group of people who are in charge of the country. Many people see the government as being responsible for the poor because they're responsible for the whole country. Those people who can afford to look after themselves do not need looking after as much as those people who cannot, and the government should be there to support those who are vulnerable in society. This includes poor people. Most people in this country do not want to live somewhere where people may starve or die because of a lack of money or a lack of opportunities. The government is able to help through different benefit systems, and these help poor people to be able to survive. This is of course paid for by taxes, and many people think that it's unfair that poor people get more of a share of taxes than other people who pay more in tax. Other people may say that the community is responsible for looking after the poor. This could include people around you, your neighbours and so on, or it could include charities and religious organisations. We've already looked at examples of charities like the Salvation Army or Shelter who look after the poor and homeless. But there are other charities as well, like the Trussell Trust, who provide food banks to those people who can't afford to buy food for their families, and organisations who provide free financial advice for people who are struggling with debts. Another group who people think should look after the poor is their family. Your family are obviously responsible for you when you're young, but as you get older, many people stop feeling responsible for their relatives. Some people think that this should not be the case, and that you should continue to love and care for your family regardless of what situation you're in. You should be the one responsible for looking after your family, and if they become poor, then you are responsible for getting them out of poverty. Finally, religious people may think that God is responsible for looking after the poor. God is seen as all-powerful, and is seen as being all-loving. Therefore, if he wants people to come out of poverty, and he wants to take care of people, he should be able to. For many religious people, this means that they do all they can to support God in helping to look after the poor. So again, we could talk about religious organisations like the Salvation Army who go out of their way to try and help poor people. Other religious people may go out and collect money for the poor, and so on. Others may say that actually it's just up to God to do this, and so they don't really need to do anything. If God wants people to come out of poverty, he will allow it, and he will help it to happen. They don't need to be the ones to put it into action. The next key rule for this topic is the Golden Rule. This can be seen as either an Islamic or a Christian teaching, but generally it's seen more to be a Christian teaching. The Golden Rule means treat others the way that you would like to be treated. This can be applied to all sorts of different situations, and is particularly good to apply in this one. I want you to write down on your piece of paper how this teaching might show it is important to help the poor. Give yourself a minute and pause the video now. Now it's time for an exam question. This is a 3-mark exam question. So we're going to start with a statement and you're going to give your opinion on it. The question is, religious people need to do more to help the poor. What do you think? As you can see, it's worth 3 marks, and that means that you only get 3 minutes in your exam. Remember, as you're answering the question, to answer the question asked including any key words. As well as this, you need to give your opinion. Make it clear to the examiner in your answer whether you agree or disagree with the statement. And finally, remember to always try to give 3 clear and different reasons for your view. Back up your opinion with 3 points. Pause the video now for 3 minutes and give yourself that amount of time in order to answer the question. Pause the video now. Okay, let's have a look at a model answer that would have got 3 out of 3 in the exam. As you can see, immediately we've got 3 different paragraphs, which show 3 different points. It begins with I agree, so it's absolutely clear to the examiner what side of the argument your point is on. Now, as you can see here, the second paragraph disagrees. That is absolutely fine. As long as you make it clear which side of the argument you are talking on, the examiner will still give you marks. Let's read through the model answer and think about why it's good. I agree with the statement because Christians believe in love your neighbour. This means that you need to be kind and caring to everyone. Therefore, they need to do more to help the poor, as it is a kind thing to do, and so many people are in poverty. Also, I disagree with the statement because Muslims believe God will help the poor. Allah is compassionate, which means He cares for everyone, so He will help the poor. People do not need to. Finally, the government should do more to help the poor, as they are in charge to look after them. The points given here vary in their level of sophistication, but each one of them gives us one of our 3 marks. If we look at the first one, we've got a clear religious teaching to back up our point. Love your neighbour is a really good one to use for this topic, and it shows that everybody should be cared for and everybody should be helped. In the next one we have another religious teaching, but a slightly more simple one. Allah is compassionate is used to show that Allah should be the one to take care of the poor. Finally, the point that we get is that the government should be the ones to take care of the poor. This is well explained, as it tells us that the government are in charge of the country, therefore they should be in charge of the poor as well as the rich. Have a look at your answer and compare it with this one. Do you think you've got 3 out of 3 marks? Time for another keywords test. Write down the definition for dependency. Can you give an example? Dependency is reliance on someone or something else. For example, drugs, alcohol or gambling could be things that people are dependent on. We did mention previously the minimum wage. As we go through this, make 4 bullet point notes to explain what it is and why people think it's a good thing. The minimum wage is the lowest hourly rate an employer can legally pay their employee. This means it is the smallest amount of money that a person can be paid per hour. There are a number of arguments for and against the minimum wage. Try to work out which is for and which is against as we go through. Write each of the arguments onto a table. On one side have for and on the other side against. People are guaranteed a wage and know how much they can budget for the month. The minimum wage is not enough to pay for a person's basic needs. The minimum wage ensures that people are paid a good wage for the work they are doing. Without it, people could be exploited. Many companies keep people on the minimum wage for a long time because they cannot afford to raise their wage. In other words, the company would struggle if they had to pay more in terms of wages. It's time for another key rule. This is an Islamic key rule, and it is the fact that Muslims believe that Allah is compassionate. Compassionate means that Allah is kind and loving, so Muslims should try to be kind and loving to one another. I want you to use this teaching to explain how this might affect a Muslim's view on helping the poor. Start your sentence with "This teaching affects a Muslim's view on helping the poor because..." Pause the video now and answer the question. Time for another keywords test. Write down the definition for the National Lottery. Try to give an example. The National Lottery is a regular gambling competition available to all over 16s, and which offers large prizes but also gives money to charity. One example could be that some of the money raised from the Lotto goes towards sports and improving health and education. We've already looked at the minimum wage. Now we need to look at the opposite end of the spectrum, and we call this excessive salaries. This is when a person earns a large amount of money in salaries and bonuses. If we think about football players' salaries and bankers' salaries, they're often referred to as excessive. People see them as getting paid more than they should be getting paid for the work that they're doing. Like we did with the minimum wage, I want you to make a table on your piece of paper. On one side write down for and on the other side against. For each of the arguments that we give, write them into the table either for or against the use of excessive salaries. People who have worked hard all their life deserve to be paid a lot of money for the work that they do. If the owner of a company or business earns a lot of money because their business makes a lot of money, many would see this as fair. They also pay tax on what they earn, so everybody benefits from it. Some people who are the bosses of their company get paid over 20 times more than other employees in their company. Many people think that excessive salaries make people lose touch with reality. Some of the things that the super rich do in their life show that they have no idea about the way others live. For your exam, you need to know about the National Lottery, or Lotto. This is a national gambling competition where huge amounts of money are given away to those who win. Money from the sale of tickets is also given to good causes, for example sports, education and other charities. Listen to these arguments and think about whether they will be for or against the use of a lottery. Make sure that you remember as many of them as possible, as you're going to do a task with them just after this. The first argument is that money is given to good causes as well as to the winners. For example, money is used to improve health and education. Sometimes the people who win the lottery are undeserving. There have been cases in the past where criminals have won millions of pounds. The Bible says, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. Gambling can get you distracted from worshipping God and make you greedy. The Quran says they ask you about wine and gambling. In them is a great sin. People get the chance to become wealthy. Lots and lots of people have become millionaires because of the lottery. Finally, it is harmless. Tickets are cheap, they only cost £2, and you can choose whether or not you do it. Think about the arguments that we've just looked at. Make a table on your piece of paper that looks like this, and use the arguments from the previous slide to make arguments for the National Lottery and against the National Lottery. Try to give 3 on each side. Pause the video now and give 3 arguments on either side of your table. Time for another religious teaching. This is an Islamic religious teaching, and it is the fact that Muslims believe in giving zakat as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. This is the giving of 2.5% of wealth to the poor and the needy. Think about this religious teaching and use it to answer this question. Explain why religious believers should help the poor. Start your sentence by saying, Christians or Muslims should help the poor because... Pause the video now and give a reason using a religious teaching. It's time for another keywords test. Give the definition for debt. Try to give an example. Debt is when a person or organisation owes others more money than it has. For example, a person may have borrowed money from student finance to pay for their university and owe it back once they start working. It's time for our second exam question. This is a 5-mark exam question, which means that we need to be looking at religious teachings in our answer. The question is, explain why many religious people will not take part in lotteries. Refer to religious beliefs and teachings in your answer. To answer this question, you must take no longer than 5 minutes. You need to remember, you need to use religious views. This is not your opinion. Use specific religious teachings. Give and explain 2 for 4 marks or 3 for 5 marks. As this is a 5-mark question, we'll be looking to give 3 religious views on the question. Focus on the key word in the question. In this case, the key word is lotteries. so we'll need to ensure that our answer refers to lotteries a lot of the time in order to make it clear to the examiner that we are answering the question given. Pause the video now and give yourself 5 minutes to answer the question. Let's have a look at a model answer that would have given us 5 out of 5. If you remember back to the last slide, we said that we needed to have 3 different religious teachings to answer the question. And as you can see here, we've got 3 clear paragraphs with 3 different religious teachings in that answer the question. Let's read through the answer and see what we think. Christians will not take part in lotteries because they believe the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. This means that if they desire money and become materialistic, it will lead them to sin and God will be unhappy. Therefore, they will not take part in lotteries, so they do not commit evil. Muslims will not take part in lotteries because in the Quran it says concerning wine and gambling, in them is great sin. This means playing the lottery is sinful, so Muslims will not do it. Finally, some Christians believe that in the Bible it says, you cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot serve both God and money. This means a Christian should not aim to be rich because they get distracted from worshipping God, so they will not take part in lotteries as it will make them more greedy and distract them from pleasing God. Now, I've already mentioned the fact that we've got 3 different paragraphs there with 3 clearly different religious teachings in. We can go through each paragraph and highlight clearly the religious teaching. Here we have, the love of money is the root of all evil. We've also mentioned clearly that this is a Christian teaching. If we look to the second paragraph, we have concerning wine and gambling, in them is great sin. We've started the paragraph by saying that this is a Muslim teaching. And finally, we've got another Christian teaching, you cannot serve 2 masters, you cannot serve both God and money. This is the first step to being successful in the 5-mark answer. But the key to being successful is ensuring that we keep on referring back to the question asked. If we look at each paragraph, we can see that in every one there is at least one reference to the lottery. This means that we're explicitly answering the question and makes it really easy for the examiner to give us the marks that we want. Making reference back to the question is really key, as it ensures the examiner is getting exactly what they want to see in order to be able to give us the marks for the question. The final thing that we need to bear in mind with a question like this is that it asks us only for reasons why people will not take part in lotteries. This means that we need to make sure that we are always talking about not taking part in lotteries. And as you can see, in each one of the paragraphs, we have referred to not taking part in lotteries. Again, we're signposting for the examiner the reason why we deserve all 5 of the marks for this question. Have a look at your question and self-assess it to see how well you think you've done. Finally, we're going to look at religious teachings on this topic. As we go through each of the religious teachings, I want you to write down on your piece of paper the 3 specific to this topic that you think that you will remember most easily. These can be the 3 that you then revise for your exam. We'll start with Islamic teachings on wealth and poverty. The first one is that one of the 5 pillars of Islam is zakat. This is compulsory giving of 2.5% of wealth to the poor and needy. This means that it's a Muslim's duty to help the poor, and doing so will make God happy. All Muslims should complete the 5 pillars, and as zakat is one of them, Muslims see it as their responsibility to give to the poor. The next teaching is a hadith, or a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. It is, he who drinks and eats while his brother goes hungry is not one of us. This means clearly that a person must worry about the poor and needy and help them, or it is like they are not a Muslim. Muhammad is telling Muslims that they must care for the poor and the needy. The next teaching is richness does not lie in worldly goods, but true richness is richness of the soul. Again, this is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. This means that a Muslim should focus on becoming a better Muslim and not worry about making money and becoming rich. Muslims should not put importance on material wealth, but rather put more importance on spiritual wealth. Next, we have the idea that Muslims believe that one of the names of God is Allah the Compassionate. This means that Allah is kind and caring, and He will look after the poor. Muslims should try to do the same thing, but they could also see this as a sign that God will look after the poor and that they don't really need to do very much about it. Finally, a hadith says no one has eaten better food than what he can earn by the work of his own hands. This means that people should not rely or depend on others to get their wealth, but work hard for it themselves. The implication is that the best food that you can possibly eat is that you've earned for yourself, and it encourages many Muslims to work hard to ensure that they can provide for themselves and their family. Write down the 3 teachings that you think that you'll remember best or that you like the most. They'll be the ones that you'll revise for your exam. Next we have Christian teachings on wealth and poverty. Again, as we go through, try to write down the 3 that you think you'll be able to remember for your exam. The first teaching is, Jesus said to a rich man, "Go and sell your possessions and give the money to the poor. You will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." This means that Christians should give to the poor and God will reward them greatly in heaven. Christians could see it as being very difficult to give away all of their money and give that money to the poor. But if they think of their rewards being eternal in heaven, this could encourage them to do just that. Next teaching is that Jesus said in the parable of the sheep and the goats that the sheep go to heaven because they fed the poor and gave water to the thirsty, but the goats did not, so they went to hell. Jesus actually says, "I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink." This means that if a person wants to go to heaven, it is not just enough to believe in Jesus. They need to help the poor as well, or they might go to hell like the goats. The next teaching is that Jesus said it would be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it would be for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. This means that being rich may make a person greedy and distracted from worshipping God, so it may stop them from getting into heaven. If we think back to the first teaching that we gave as well, it could be very difficult for a rich person to sell their possessions, give money to the poor, and devote their life to following Jesus. Many rich people feel like they've worked hard for their money and feel like it's unjustifiable to then get rid of it in order to follow a religion. The next teaching comes from the Bible. You cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot serve both God and money. This means that when a person wants to make money, they can become greedy and not worship God properly. This suggests that it's not great to just want to make money. You need to want to worship God most in your life. Otherwise, He will not look kindly upon you. Finally, in the Bible it says the love of money is the root of all evil. This means that the desire for money can lead to sin such as stealing money or making money in the wrong way, like drug dealing. Neither of these things will be looked kindly upon by most Christians, particularly stealing, as it is one of the 10 Commandments to not steal. Dealing drugs could certainly be frowned upon, as it's causing other people to harm their body, which are seen as being temples of the Holy Spirit. It could also be seen to go against teachings like do not kill or the sanctity of life, as drugs often lead to the death of those using them. It's time for our final exam practice. This is a 6-mark question. The question is, nobody should be paid an excessive salary. Do you agree? Give reasons for your answer showing that you thought about more than one point of view and explain religious beliefs and teachings in your answer. You get 12 minutes to answer a question like this. There are a few things that we need to think about when we're answering this. Obviously, the first thing is that it asks you, do you agree? So you need to make it clear which side of the argument your own opinion is on. The next thing it tells you to do is to give reasons for your answer showing that you've thought about more than one point of view. This means that you need to give reasons for why you agree or disagree, as well as showing the other side of the argument. Finally, we must make sure that we look at religious beliefs and teachings in our answer. This means that we need to try to support all of the points that we give with religious teachings. Show in your answer that you know exactly what the key word means. Here, the key word that we're being given is excessive salaries. Give yourself 12 minutes to answer this question. Pause the video now and time yourself, trying to give at least 4 peel paragraphs so that you're fully explaining your answer to the question. Let's have a look at a model answer that would have got 6 out of 6. We'll read through the answer first, and then we'll think about what's going on that makes it good. Some people may agree because they think it's unfair. Other people may disagree because they think that they've worked hard for it and deserve it. Some Christians agree because the Bible says you cannot serve both God and money. This means it is not good to be rich and on an excessive salary, as it can make you greedy and distract you from worshipping God. Therefore, they should not be paid an excessive salary, as it can make them greedy. Some Muslims may disagree because they believe in the Ummah. This means to look after every Muslim as they are part of one community. If people are paid an excessive salary, it is good, as they can use it to help the poor and needy. Therefore, they should be paid an excessive salary, as they can use it to help the Ummah. Some Christians disagree, as they believe in the teaching you reap what you sow. This means that a person gets what they work for. Therefore, they should be paid an excessive salary, as they've worked hard for it, so they deserve it. Some Christians agree because they believe Jesus said it would be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it would be for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. This means that a person should not want a lot of money, as it can keep them away from heaven. Therefore, they should not be paid an excessive salary, so they have a better chance to go to heaven. Finally, some Muslims may disagree because Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that richness does not lie in worldly goods, but true richness is richness of the soul. This means that people need to focus on becoming better people, as this is what will benefit them in the afterlife. Therefore, they should not be paid an excessive salary, as this could make them arrogant and have an impure soul, which would not get a Muslim into heaven. Let's think now about why this answer will be worth 6 out of 6. The first thing that we have to remember with a question like this is to keep on referring back to the key word in the question. In this case, it's excessive salary. The second thing that we need to remember is to use peel paragraphs wherever we can. This means that we're making a clear point, that we're giving some evidence, we're explaining the evidence, and then we're linking it back to that idea of excessive salary. In every single one of the paragraphs, you can see that the final sentence includes excessive salary. It signposts to the examiner that the point you're making is answering the question in the way that they want it to be doing. We can also see that in each one of the answers we've got a clear religious teaching. Here, you cannot serve both God and money, and here we've got the idea of the Ummah. Finally, each one of these religious teachings is clearly explained. Without this, it's unclear as to how each one of those religious teachings actually answers the question. We must make sure as well that each one goes either for or against a statement, and that we've got an even mix of both sides of the argument. If we follow these rules to answer a 6-mark question, we should have no problem at all in answering it. We just have to ensure that we remember religious teachings, we refer to the key word in the question, and we link it back to the question, making sure that we look at both sides of the argument. Have a look at your answer and see how many marks you think you'd give it out of 6. Are you always linking your points back to the statement? Are you using religious teachings to support every view that you give? And are you answering the question by using key words from it? In this case, you need to have mentioned excessive salary in each one of the paragraphs that you've given and made it clear that you know what an excessive salary is. Hopefully this video will have helped you in looking at religious attitudes towards rich and poor in British society before your exam. If you need to look back at any of the parts of the video, feel free to do so. And if you need to look at any more exam questions, have a look at some other videos under SGA Dixon's, which also go through the 3, 5 and 6 mark exam questions before your exam.